10 people are left dead, over 30 people injured. And the mystery of whodunit still remains to this very day. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the 1978 Holiday Inn fire. Viewer discretion is advised. This case occurred in Greece, New York, back in 1978. And it happened at the Holiday Inn, which was located at the time on West Ridge Road. On this November 26, 1978 day, there were roughly 200 or so guests checked into the hotel. It was basically fully booked. The bulk of the guests that particular evening were actually from Canada. There were a ton of tourists there. There were also 2 wedding parties at the hotel that night, and there was a singles gathering, I guess, that were there in the hotel as well. Just a minute or so before 2:30 a.m., a fire started. It originated in a stairwell on the first floor, and this storage area contained a lot of paper products. Once this fire started, it moved very, very quickly. The stairways, they would later say, acted as if they were chimneys, and it caused the fire to raise upwards, and it reached all the way to the attic. On this particular evening, the fire doors were open, and so the fire very quickly spread into the hallways. And this was specifically in the corridors of, I guess, the west wing of the hotel. And then it also went down a passageway in the northern part of the hotel. This was holiday shopping season time, so there was a lot of, like wrapping paper and stuff like that. There was a bunch of loose paper products, essentially, and the fire basically was fueled more by that. And once it spread down the hallways and the corridors, the fire then basically ran up to the roof of the building. And once that happened, the roof was slowly, basically crumbling apart, and there were like balls of fire falling from the ceilings. At 2:38 a.m., an off-duty firefighter from Greece who was actually driving on his way home from his security job that he did on the side, his name was Harold Bud Phillips. He would radio in from his car because he spotted the fire from the road. And then another man, a former chief of a fire department there, he was also on his way home. He also noticed the fire. He also radioed it in. So when Bud Phillips, he drives into the parking lot of the hotel, and he already starts seeing kind of guests trying to flee the hotel, because at this point there were guests who were aware now of the fire. And he is essentially trying to help guests safely exit the building. And then the second individual who noticed the fire pulled into the parking lot, and then he too began to assist with helping get people out. By this time, 911 has been called, and there are literally hundreds of firefighters that would eventually arrive to the hotel. For the following 2 hours or so, almost 2 hours, the fire just ravaged this building. There were over 100 plus firefighters there. There were tons of fire trucks. They were trying desperately to put this fire out, and it took a very long time, because this fire had started, they think, very quickly, and it spread rapidly through this building. And because of that, almost the entire building went up in flames. And it was such a fierce fire that it took them hours to finally get this fire contained. Roughly 170, 180 people were evacuated from the building. And, most of them were barefoot. They were in their pajamas because it was the middle of the night when this happened. They were all asleep. You had guests who were not able to exit their rooms. And so at that point, there were several guests who had to climb out of their second floor windows and jump down to the ground. And it's, 16 degrees outside at that time, as it was very, very cold. There were also guests on the third floor, and they were jumping out of their windows as well. Some of them got injured from jumping out, but it ended up saving their lives as well. By 4:43 a.m., the majority of the fire had been contained. More than 90% of the building's west ring roof were gone, completely just decimated. And the damage within the hotel was extreme. I mean, this hotel was absolutely destroyed by this fire. There was no more roof, essentially, for most of the hotel. Rooms were completely charred out. There were, the beds and everything were almost gone. And unfortunately, at the end of this, once the fire was fully contained and they were able to enter the building safely, they found 10 bodies inside. 10 people had died in this fire. One of the bodies was so badly burned, it was charred beyond recognition. And they had to use dental records to eventually identify that person. But the coroner would state that all 10 of these people who died from smoke inhalation. The guests who perished were Margaret Duncan, Accout Raymond Sandu, Pamela Sagriff, Ruby Cushion and Ruby's daughter, also named Ruby, Edward Francis Farley and his wife Laureen, Joyce Plum, Nancy Garrett, and Stephen Gregory Ford. Unfortunately, I don't have photos of all of them, and so I don't want to put up the wrong photo. Those were the deceased. 5 of them were found jammed in a doorway on the 3rd floor. So obviously they were trying to rush out of the building, but it was too late. The National Fire Protection Association investigator in 1979 would declare that human error and issues with the hotel's interior finishes, stairways, and alarm systems contributed to the high fatality rate. And this hotel had, in the past, it had met its existing fire codes. It adhered to them. However, it did lack some serious fire prevention tools. For example, there were no smoke detectors in the building. There was no sprinkler system, unbelievably. The alarm system was not connected to the Grease Ridge Fire Department or other security agency. There was only one vertical firewall between the 2 wings of the hotel, and the alarm system consisted only of one bell in the middle of each of the 2 wings' 5 floors. And those bells were not all that loud, so the guests probably just didn't hear it. This happened during a string of other fires that occurred, and those fires occurred. The starting point was in the basement of these other buildings, and so there was a point where they thought, are these all connected? But they were never able to conclude that the Holiday Inn fire was connected to those other fires, which primarily happened in apartment buildings. Now, immediately after the fire happened, in that immediate couple of days, the fire chief at the time in New York determined that the evidence would show that there was no proof that the fire was intentionally set. But that was just after a preliminary examination of the scene. But then soon after this, there would be other experts involved and other, firefighters and stuff that would say, well, this fire spread rapidly, way too rapidly. It was such an intense fire, and the speed in which it took over this hotel was more consistent with saying that someone actually did set this fire on purpose. They would essentially have their task force set up at the hotel for the next month or so trying to investigate this. Through this investigation, they would reverse their initial thoughts that this was not intentionally set. They would then switch to that this was very likely, or actually almost pretty much positively, an arson. That someone did, in fact, start this fire with intent. They found evidence that there was a flammable liquid that had been poured, deliberately poured. And this happened in that storage area where the fire originated from. And then someone set that fuel, that flammable liquid, on fire next to the storage room that contained a massive amount of paper products. And that's why they set the fire in that particular area, because they knew it would spread quick. There were burn patterns on the carpeting outside the storage closet, which investigators said indicated an accelerant had been splashed onto the carpets as well. An aluminum kick plate on a door near where the fire started was melted at the bottom, indicating the use of an accelerant. So they had more than enough evidence to conclude that this, in fact, was definitely an arson. Now, the matter is who did it and why? Well, the problem is arsons are extremely difficult. First of all, they're extremely difficult at times to prove they were arsons, but it's also incredibly difficult to investigate and discover the culprit behind these. Because usually when someone sets a fire of this nature, they're long gone. They're not anywhere near the crime scene before the fire even engulfs the building. And because it's a fire, it destroys evidence. So it'll burn away any traces of like fingerprints or DNA or anything of that nature. So it's very, very difficult to find out the who. And as a matter of fact, decades would go by and there still is no answers as to who did this. Their theories would change over the decades. Some people would say this was not an arson. Then they would go back to saying it was an arson. Then they would say, the pour patterns they found on the carpeting outside the storage closet could have innocent explanations, not necessarily that someone deliberately poured accelerant. In November of 2013, the police in New York would, execute a warrant at the Ridge Road Fire District on Long Pond Road. They never said what the warrant was for, but it was related to this arson, and they never would say what they found in that warrant search. But they obviously had some evidence or something to suggest that maybe they would find evidence at that particular fire station to see, because they're looking for documents, it sounded like, to see if there was anything they could find in connection to this particular Holiday Inn fire. Now, at this time, the fire is still officially labeled an arson, meaning that if they can find the person who did this, they'll be charged with felony murder, because this is a murder, this is a homicide. 10 people died. But they also have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this was an arson. And now that it's decades later, it becomes more difficult because you're not fresh there at the crime scene. There isn't a lot of evidence. But they would also say in that same time frame of 2013 or so that they actually had multiple suspects. One of the primary suspects that was named, in Canada, they were doing like a documentary type thing on this fire because a lot of Canadians died in this fire. And they named a man named Bud Phillips as one of the primary suspects. And if you remember that name, Bud Phillips, he was the very first person to call in this fire. And he was a fireman at the time of this case. And he is, at least as the time of that documentary was made in Canada, he was the chief of the Ridge Road Fire District, which, if you remember, I just stated a few minutes ago that the police had executed a search warrant at that particular fire station. Now, Bud Phillips has been interviewed and he has talked about this in the public, and he's always denied having any responsibility to this fire. And quite honestly, there's no physical evidence that actually connects him to the arson. There was also a second suspect. I guess that this person who has been unnamed had a history of setting house fires. Then a third suspect came up, a man whose wife was staying at the Holiday Inn, who was there to escape domestic violence, while this husband to this woman had found out that where she was staying at the hotel. And so there is a theory that this man, out of an act of domestic violence, set the hotel on fire. He's also been unnamed. There was also a suspect in terms of who was setting a series of fires. There was like 10 or so fires set in the weeks and months around the Holiday Inn fire they don't know if it was by one person or by multiple arsonists. There was a demolition expert who was at the singles dance the night before the arson, and his statements to investigators prompted some suspicions. He received a contract with the hotel demolition after the fire. So this guy benefited from the fire, but he was also at the hotel when the fire occurred. Now, because there are multiple suspects and they vary so greatly, it's impossible to narrow down which one of them may have done this. And Bud Phillips still remains one of the primary suspects in this. However, no arrests have ever been made. So Bud Phillips was one of two people that they would eventually narrow down their list of suspects to. The other one is the individual who had been setting fires previously to apartment buildings, and he was committing arsons. And I guess they did know who this person was, and he lived very, very close to the Holiday Inn. Bud Phillips had been questioned by police for like 14, 15 straight hours. He gave alibis, and he has been cooperative with police, and he's gone on to serve, as a fireman and now a chief, or at one point was a fire chief. And, he's never shied away from talking about it. It doesn't sound like he's really truly the guy who did it, but that doesn't mean he didn't. And that's kind of where this story stands today, is that it's unsolved. Nobody knows who started this fire. Nobody knows why. All they really know is that 10 people were left dead. Over 30 people injured. A building destroyed. The building was eventually demolished, and I think a Red Robin, a restaurant, purchased the land and built a restaurant on top of it. But there's always that reminder of this fire. It's always there. And after decades of investigating this with no evidence, and this may be impossible to solve. It may literally require a confession in order to solve this, because fires destroy evidence, so they have very little, if anything. But somebody somewhere out there might know the truth. Perhaps that someone is you. You might have the information they need to finally solve this case. If you have any information on the 1978 Holiday Inn fire in Greece, New York, please call 585-581-4016. If you have anything at all, please come forward. Please help these families get justice. By the way, there were lawsuits filed. Most of them were settled between Holiday Inn and the victims to an undisclosed amount of money, because the actual hotel was also at fault because of their lack of fire tools that they had there, fire prevention tools. People would have survived. The people would not have died had they had all these extra measures in place. But the fact of the matter is that someone likely started this fire with the intent of hurting and killing people. And if you know who that is, please come forward. Please help the victims of the Holiday Inn fire get the justice they rightfully deserve. But that is it for this case. True crime, Rooney, Dooney, Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, please subscribe to the channel if you are new here. Hello, my name is Mike. I tell true crime stories here, obviously, multiple times a week. So please subscribe, give this video a like, hit the bell to be notified of all my future uploads, and share the video, comment so more people can see the video. I also tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. The link to that is in the link tree below in the description of this video. And then also in that link tree, you will find my case list. It's in alphabetical order for the most part. If you scroll through it and you don't see a name you want me to cover, just send me a quick email. My email is also listed below. Just send me the name of the case, where it happened, and when it happened. Then I'll add that case to my list, and then eventually I will cover it. If you are a loved one of a murder victim, unsolved case, missing person, please let me know in the email so I can make sure that case is given a higher priority, especially if it's a current active case right now. But that being said, that is the end of this video. So until the next case, ta-ta for now, true crime. Mm-mm.